50th episode, we have Dr. Kyle Ross. Kyle is the head academic advisor for the College of Business at Oregon State University and has over 10 years of advising experience. Prior to this position, he was an advisor at Washington State University for a variety of departments and also at Eastern Washington University. He joined Nakata in 2012 and has served as chair of the Undecided and Exploratory Students Advising Community, as a division representative on the council, as a board member, and as a leader and mentor in the Emerging Leaders Program. He's also served on his region steering committee and in a variety of committees and advisory boards. He has presented and published on parallel planning, advising alternatives, and solution-focused techniques in advising. And to top it off, Kyle is the president of Nakata for the 2021-2022 term. Kyle earned his bachelor's in psychology through the University of Washington, his master's in counseling, and his doctorate in educational leadership from Washington State University. His dissertation focused on using action research methods to learn about student attrition from an online nursing program and to implement support, retention, and completion strategies. Kyle was born and raised in Tucson, Arizona, and moved to the Pacific Northwest when he was 16 years old and has loved the region ever since. He studied classical piano for 20 years. He also participates in community theater, such as or as much as he can, acting in both plays and musicals. His favorite book series is Ender's Game. He is also an avid gamer, with current favorites being Warframe and League of Legends. He is also a nerd and plays in 3 separate Dungeons and Dragons campaigns, currently with his favorite class being Warlock. Kyle, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me, Matt.
So I think this is going to be a fun interview. And just as we finish reading your bio, we have a special guest host who I'm going to go ahead and add to this interview right now. And that is with Leslie Ross. Leslie, hey.
Hi, Kyle. No relation.
Hey, Leslie, how are you?
Great. I'm so excited to get a chance to talk to you about your experience with Nakata.
Yeah, it's good to see you today.
Yeah, so it's perfect timing, Leslie. So we just introduced Kyle to the podcast. We got to read his bio. So we're going to throw the first question to Kyle. And Kyle, can you give us, your journey into advising and to higher ed, how you got where you're at?
Yeah, certainly. So my story's kind of funny. The common phrase is you stumble your way into advising, or not everyone knows they want to be an advisor at the get-go. Well, I did. When I was an undergrad, I actually had no idea what I wanted to do my first year at UW, and thought about math, pre-med, a few other options. And when I met with an advisor, I had a really disheartening experience because I told him I had no idea what I wanted to do, how to even pick a major out of the 150 some odd majors there. And the person was like, I can't help you if you don't know what you want to do. So I went back to my room and spent a whole weekend learning about the catalog, degree audits, what if reports in the degree audit, and started figuring out class planning and stuff for the next term. Pretty quickly realized after that I wanted to major in psychology. And I also started helping my friends out on the floor. Totally not ethical, by the way. Side note, don't do this. But I would help my peers figure out their degree audits, understand what classes to take, who to contact for more advising and things. And pretty soon after doing that, about 15 or 16 times in a given term, my roommate turned around and was like, and you don't know what you want to do for the rest of your life? So at that point, I thought, well, I really want to do that for high school students. So I got my master's in counseling to pursue becoming a high school counselor, and did my internship and realized, this wasn't the best fit for me. As much as I loved the students, there was just some different rules, regulations, and procedures that makes it a little bit harder. So then I realized I wanted to become a full-time academic advisor at that point. So then I applied for a bunch of jobs. It's kind of hard breaking into advising without prior advising experience, but then WSU gave me a chance. Dr. Susan Poe, who was the director of the Center for Advising and Career Development at the time at WSU, hired me, and I started off as an undecided and exploratory student advisor at that point. So helping students figure out what they want to major in, which was a really great fit for me for my first position. And I've loved it since. So 10 years later, still in advising. Now I'm a head academic advisor for Oregon State University. I moved over to Oregon June of 2020, so during the pandemic, which was a bit of an adjustment. But now I supervise a team of 12 professional advisors who all advise college business students. wonderful opportunity. It's super fun to transition to administration, but still have my foot in the door a little bit to work with students directly. Yeah, so that's been my start, and here I am now.
So, Kyle, one of my questions for you is, how did you get involved with Nakata?
Yeah, great question. So when I started at the CACD, Center for Advising Career Development at WSU, my first supervisor was Lisa Laughter, who then worked at the UC system for a bit. I think she's now pursuing full-time professional and life coaching at this point. I'd still be advising. I'm not sure. I'm not on Facebook anymore, but Lisa, if you're listening, hi Lisa, I miss you. So Lisa was my first direct supervisor, and she was really engaged in Nakata at that time. She was chair of the Member and Career Services Committee that was up and running at that point. She was really involved in the region. The year prior, she had just won Region 8 Best of Region presentation, so I got to see her pre-conference my first year as an advisor. And a couple months into it, she introduced me to the WSU Academic Advising Association, so our specific chapter of Nakata there, and started introducing me to colleagues. And then there was a local one-day drive-in conference at the University of Idaho for an advising symposium where Dr. Charlie Nutt presented as the keynote. And I was like, he is awesome. And that looks really fun. I want to present at some point. And I felt really inspired at that point to, give a shot at presenting at some point, thinking about sharing my expertise when I developed it at some point in time. So I told Lisa that. I want to say that was closer to December, about 5 months into my job. And she's like, great, proposals closed for the Region 8 conference in a month. Why don't you and I co-present something? And so we submitted a proposal. I didn't think it was going to get accepted, but it did. And so we presented on facilitating that supervisor-supervisee relationship effectively in advising, and had a lot of fun putting that together. And that's when I got to my first Nakata event, which was the Region 8 conference in 2012, which was held in Portland. So I'm really excited that 10 years later, we'll be having the annual conference in Portland for 2022. So that's how I got started and have been hooked on Nakata ever since.
Yeah, and anyone listening to this in January, proposals are open to submit for the Portland conference. So get your submission in, whether it's a poster session, concurrent session, pre-conference, go with a group or individually. So this was not planned. I just want to throw it out there because Kyle mentioned Portland. And fast forward, you're now Nakata president. So congratulations on that. And I guess, what was it what made you kind of want to put your name in there in terms of, maybe becoming president? And now that you are president, any goals that you have set as president?
Yeah, so I've always been really inspired by Nakata as an association, all the things it does for its membership, and how we ultimately promote student success through excellent academic advising. It's my professional home. Every year there's an annual conference or region conference. It feels like I'm going to my third home, away from home and everything. And it's just a wonderful experience. So ever since I got started with Nakata and the relationships I built, I knew I wanted to give back to the association in some way, shape, or form, and wanted to figure out how I could do that. So as soon as I even got engaged in the 2012 region conference, I was like, hey, I want to help plan the next region conference. And so I was on the program committee, like the committee for putting the actual program together for the 2013 conference in Alaska, for Region 8. And so I immediately started seeking out opportunities to find ways to volunteer my time and contribute to the association. And early on, I was like, one day, if there was ever a way I could ever serve as president, that would be an amazing way to say I gave back in the fullest extent that I possibly could. So that was why I always kind of had my eye on and aspiration towards that position in the long run, because I just felt that that was going to be how I really wanted to give back and contribute to the association in a meaningful way. Had no idea how to get there, and where to start or what guidance to go for with that. So 2014, the first annual conference there was my first annual conference I got to go to, and that was in Salt Lake. I want to say it was 2014. Let me think about this. Hold on a second. Actually, that is a lie. It was 2013 annual conference. There we go. Salt Lake was in 2013 annual conference. So I went there and went to the first time attendee session, and they divided us up by like what population we were interested in serving. So I stood in the undecided exploratory students part, and it was just me. And so I stood there and I was like, oh, this is fun. And then David Spite came up to me at that point and introduced himself, really talked about the association with me. I don't think he even mentioned he was on the board at that time. He was very humble about that, and just introduced himself as a normal member in the association that just knows a lot about how it all goes. And in that moment, he's like, you should run for chair of the Undecided Exploratory Students Group. At that time, it was a commission before we merged commissions and interest groups into advising communities. And so that's how I got started in Nakata leadership, was just running for that. And then a couple years later, figuring out what does that mean in terms of next steps and what directions to pursue, I applied to be an emerging leader for the Emerging Leaders Program to seek out a formal mentor who could help really figure out where my strengths are and how to use that in the association. And that's how I got paired with Nathan Vickers, who was vice president of the association, and oh my God, knew so much about the association, the ins and outs of all the different divisions, of the structure. And he really helped me pursue multiple avenues all at the same time, getting involved in the region division, the admin division, and the advising communities division all at the same time. And really figuring out which area kind of I land best in, do the best work for. And then that kept me going forward with the advising communities division. From there, I then served as division representative on the council and eventually moved up to the board. So then 2 years later on the board, it was my opportunity to run for president. Gave it a lot of thought. Initially, I was like, you know what? I should not be the person to be president of this association. And a few people encouraged me to say, run anyway, submit your interest, show you want to do this, your commitment, see what happens. And if you're not selected, then you already knew that this wasn't your time or your place to be the president. That's fine. If you're selected, then that means it is the time, and do it. So I did. I ultimately did not win. Dr. Melinda Anderson, who's now the executive director of the association, won president, which was perfect. I called her the day of, and I was like, Madam President! I was just so excited for her and over the moon for her, because she is just a fantastic advising professional, advising administrator, and person and friend. So she was elected president while also applying for the executive director job, and then she was ultimately hired. So at that point, the board had to decide how do they want to proceed from there, and the board decided to go with second place in the most votes for the president. That was me, and here I am. So really excited to be working with Melinda pretty closely, since she's the executive director and doing a tremendous job at it. She's the perfect fit for that position. Been a really fun year so far.
So I guess this is a opportunity to say congratulations also, and watch what you wish for, Kyle, because you never know. You thought you lost and now you won.
Right. But it's been awesome. The board's great. We've been going through a lot of really good work together. I definitely learned a lot for myself as a leader and as a facilitator that really quickly I needed to work on and improve my skills around. So it's also really helpful for me to see my areas of improvement, but also feeling like I am giving back to the association in the way that I've been wanting to.
Sir, what are your goals for your presidency? What would you like to see Nakata accomplish?
Yeah, so most of my goals are just continuation of efforts that have been going on in the association for a long while. My intent was to not come in and say, I want to do X, Y, or Z, but rather the A, B, and C have already been in motion. So how do we make sure that those actually come to fruition and make sure that they do happen? So a few tasks and goals that included, I was a part of a working group to review the bylaws of the association. So we went through about a 1.5 year long process to review those, and wanting to make sure that that gets through a board review comprehensively, and that it's the way that they should be written and structured. So that's been one goal. There's been a lot of work from the race, ethnicity, inclusion work group that has been elevated to the board for review. Part of that has been they proposed moving a lot of their work into a newly formed advisory board, the Inclusion and Engagement Training Advisory Board, name pending. There's a task force kind of forming that group, members, chair, and potentially their the name, but also their function, mission, and goals. So wanting to make sure that that gets on its feet and standing, because that was approved in the prior board. So just wanting to make sure that that does happen. A couple of other things. We did just approve a new vision, mission, and strategic goals. So we had a vision and mission statement and goal statements that have been around in the association for several years now. And we are at a very different time in the association, and certainly for a variety of catalysts for organizational change at that point. But we knew we're heading into kind of a new era for Nakata. President Olivares noted that in her term as president in an Academic Advising Today article. She felt like we were heading into this new era of advising. I really support that. So the board drafted up new vision, mission, and strategic goal statements. So the next step for that is to benchmark the strategic goals into what steps can be completed in a year, what steps should be completed by 2024 or by 2026 to accomplish these overall goals. So that's a work that will be ongoing this year, and hopefully we'll have solidified by the end of this year. Term year, not calendar year. We need more time for that. And we're also looking at a structure review. So several different initiatives have really called for it's time to review the structure of the association. So there was wonderful work done for a region review that we are now on steps of how do we implement the recommendations. We're getting very close to releasing, here are the recommendations that the board has approved and which groups are responsible for executing those recommendations. I'm really excited about that. But that was one piece. So the region review really showing that we have ways we can improve or reconsider how we engage with members in the region division. The race, ethnicity, inclusion work group highlighted that we should consider a structure review just to see if there are any hidden barriers to access, member engagement, professional development, leadership roles overall that we want to consider. So that was another catalyst. And then another catalyst was the new vision, mission, and goals. You want your structure to make sure it supports the work that needs to be done around those pieces now. And then lastly, the structure of the association has largely been intact since 1999, 2000 timeframe. So, 20 years later, we have membership numbers that are doubled or even tripled at some points in time. We're a very different organization now than we were then in a lot of really good ways. And so it's just time to kind of give it another look and say, is this still supporting the work that we need to do? And that could very well be the answer. Yes, we don't really need to change anything because everything is doing great and fine and successful. But we also might see that there are some needs for change. So we're getting ready to start a multi-phase effort around a structure review. And so there will be more details about that released in future Academic Advising Today articles I write, but that is certainly something that we want to make sure also happens as a product of the REI work and region review work. Yeah, and that's all I can think of off the top of my head at this point. So that's certainly plenty of work for the board to accomplish over the next 10 months before our term is up.
Yeah, that's a lot of things going on, but that means that work is getting done. Conversations are being had, and then things are going to be progressing, and that usually means that there's going to be positive impacts with that. One thing I do wish is that the president term is more than 1 year, because it almost feels like once you actually get through that whole year, like you're learning the ropes and then you're done. And, can you get a second year just to implement some of those ideas? So maybe that's something that can be worked on as well. But as a new member, Nakata member, or even just like a veteran, Nakata member, someone who's very seasoned, they've been around, they've attended conferences, they've attended webinars, they've networked. Sometimes the structure of Nakata can be really confusing. You have boards and councils, regions, you have chairs, things that you get nominated for or put your name in the hat for, others that maybe you get picked for. Not that you have to go through everything, but if someone came up to you and said, Kyle, can you help explain the Nakata organization? How would you describe that?
Yeah, I have given that talk quite a bit to folks. How to do this succinctly, but get the information across is always a really good question. There's a lot in the association. The association's a large association, right? Our membership fluctuates between 10 to 15,000 members at any given point in time. So inherently, that means large structure, lots of things. So the best way I can describe this is through the division structure of the association. So Nakata consists of 3 divisions that carry out the majority of work of the association. So we've got the administrative division, the region division, and the advising communities division. So each of those divisions is responsible for ensuring programming is run in a way that aligns with our members' needs and interests, but they do so differently. So the region division engages with members based on geographical location. So folks who are close by borders, how do we bring them all together? And how do we engage those members who are closer in a region that might have very similar advising issues for their students at large, or just geographical interests that shape their work overall. So we divide into 10 different regions. Each region has a steering committee that helps with planning the region conference, communications, professional development, member engagement, variety of different tasks. So in the region steering committees, if folks are really interested in giving back to their region, wanting to volunteer that time there, they can run for certain roles that are elected, and that depends on the region. So each region steering committees, their structures are dictated by their operating principles. So in their operating principles, it could say that this state liaison is elected, this state liaison is appointed. This chair or coordinator is elected, this one's appointed. So it depends on the role. Appointed means that you're putting your name in the hat for consideration by folks who will select a person for that role. Elected means you're running, and then your region constituents are voting for you at that point. So that's one group you could get involved in as a region steering committee. And then you could also consider chairing your region, which would mean chairing the region steering committee overall. So we have region chairs, 10 of those, and they are all elected by their regions. So if you want to run for Region 8 chair, then the Region 8 members will vote for Region 8 chair when their term goes. And so each of those terms are 2 years long. The advising communities division is all around folks' interests regarding specific populations they advise, institutional type they advise in, student needs and situations, theories, approaches, models to advising. So the advising communities division is all about helping advisors advise students across institutional types, across populations, across different issues in advising that impact student success. So in we have 37 now, 38, over 35 advising communities. There are lots of different things that advisors do, right? And so each of those advising communities has a steering committee as well. So you could serve on your advising community steering committee. Most of those are appointed by the chair. You would contact the chair to say you're interested at that point. You could also serve as an advising community chair for 2 years, which is an elected position. All 30-some chairs are elected. And then from there, since that group itself, that division overall is very large, it's harder for folks to kind of manage that entire division. So there's a next kind of level up there where we have cluster representatives. So we organize all of those advising communities into clusters, just random assignment of groups. So that way a cluster representative who's been a chair can help mentor other chairs and be successful in their role. And that takes that supervision of 30-some chairs and consolidates it to 9 folks who work with them instead of a couple of folks. I'll get to division representatives in a second, but just wanting to talk about that cluster rep role for a little bit. And so cluster representatives are appointed by the division representatives. So those folks would say, hey, I'm interested in mentoring other chairs at that point. And then we have the administrative division, which is about carrying out a lot of the work of the association that is done through formal programming. So the Emerging Leaders Program, the institutes, the annual conference, international conference, but also around things that really align with the strategic goals. So professional development, sustainable leadership, inclusion and engagement. So those are all helping ensure that programming meets those goals, and then also what the entire association can do for its members around those areas and to help that programming excel. So we divide those up into two different groups. We've got committees that are more strategic goal focused. So thinking through, okay, inclusion and engagement, what does that mean for our members? How do we become a more inclusive association? How do we maximize member engagement? Or sustainable leadership, how do we prepare new leaders and also ensure some succession and continued engagement with the association? So we've got committees, and then we've got advisory boards that are specific to very specific programming in the association. So the Emerging Leaders Program, annual conference programming, webinars, etc. So for those folks, to serve on a committee or an advisory board, you have to serve as a formal member of one of those groups. So you contact the chair and say, hey, I'm interested in serving as a committee member and as an advisory board member. Those are appointed by the chair specifically. And they evaluate just needs, because each committee or advisory board is a little bit different. Some need larger groups of membership, others need smaller and a little bit more mobile groups. So there's no magic number there where we say there's 15 members per committee or advisory board. Those are all appointed, but committee chairs are elected by committee members. Advisory board chairs are appointed by division representatives and the board. So they figure out who's the person with the most expertise to help continue on that programming. So those are the three divisions and what they do. Now that captures a large majority of the work of the association that is volunteer member driven. We have the executive office that is staffed employees that are helping carry out and support that work. So there's a lot of work that goes over there as well. And then there's some work that exists outside of the divisions that are largely coordinated by the executive office. So that could be, the journal and publications overall, where the journal has their own editorial board driving what articles get published and things like that. So then, as folks want to consider pursuing higher up level positions after being a chair of one of these groups, they certainly can do so. There's two different entities that kind of help oversee the larger work of the association. So first, there's the council, which consists of division representatives from each of the three divisions. And so you've got 2 representatives from Advising Communities Division, 2 representatives from the Administrative Division, and 2 representatives from the Region Division. Each of those, we've got 1 elected from the chairs of the respective divisions, and then 1 appointed from the division reps and the board help appoint those. So 6 division representatives that work with the vice president of the association. Vice president convenes the council, and they're bringing up the grassroots issues of the organization. So, a steering committee of a region says, hey, this might be a problem. The region looks at it and says, yep, this is an issue, but it's not just our region, it's multiple regions. So now we're going to bring it up to the entire region division. Then those division reps can say, yep, that just impacts our division, or hold on, this impacts everybody. So we should bring this up to the council at this point to think through what do we want to do about this strategically. And then sometimes the council will say, we need the board to engage in this and think through what this means for the next 5 years rather than how we're going to triage this right now. So the council is focusing on the now issues of the organization. So what is going on immediately and how do we address that issue? What initiatives do we want to pursue next year or two? And so a lot of work gets done with the division reps collaboratively to think through how do our different divisions really work together? How are they different? And elevating those issues that do come up from the members of wants and needs of the association. The board then thinks through the strategic management of the organization. So the board of directors is 9 board members that are all elected for 3-year terms. So that's a little bit different. Most other positions are 2-year terms in the association. The board is an elected 3-year term. And so serving on the board of directors, you elect 3 people per year, and that makes the 9. And they're thinking through issues that are going to take us into the next 5 or 10 years of the organization. So removing themselves a little bit from those now issues that need to be addressed, letting the council do their work, they're thinking through, well, the vision, mission, strategic goals are going to be work that continues on for the next 10 years. What does that mean for us? How do we strategically place the need of forming a new group in the association? Where does that belong or exist? How do we conduct a review of the structure of the association that's going to impact literally everybody in the future if it changes? So the board is more of the strategic operations, more of the thinking 5 years out from now issues of the organization. And so then that is convened and facilitated by the president. So the president and the vice president serve as board members. And in order to serve as a vice president, you need to be elected to the board first. So your first year, you're serving on the board, you're learning, and then you're deciding if you want to pursue an officer role for your second or third year. So you could be a board member your first year, president the second year, board member your third year. Or you could be board member your first year, vice president your second year, president your third year. In my case, I was board member for 2 years, and now in my third year, I'm president. And so those 2 positions and the board of directors overall are elected by the entire membership of voting members. So that's the association at large, where all the work kind of lands and how you would get into those roles as briefly as I can. Sorry.
You summarized that so well. I'm impressed because you have no notes in front of you. I'm like, what?
I've talked about this a lot.
I can tell. So you've also presented and published on some parallel planning, and I was hoping that you could describe what parallel planning is and the benefits of it.
Sure. I wish I had Billy Strufert here right now because she is a great partner and colleague in this. So Billy Strufert, Augustana University, and a PhD student with Kansas State University in the first academic advising PhD cohort. Wonderful person. Unfathomably smart. Holy crap, she's so smart. We work together to talk about parallel planning and advising alternatives. So, there's 2 different strategies when you're working with students to disengage from their career goals that they might be anchored in right now, or their major or academic goals, and re-engage in other ones that might be a better fit for them, more timely, or could be a forced shift due to whatever reason. That happens a lot with careers, right? You get into an accident, maybe you can't carry out your specific career anymore, and you need to think about what you're going to do next. So there's always 2 ways you can work with students through that. You can proactively help them out with parallel planning, thinking through, it's not a no now, but what happens if you need to disengage from your goal and re-engage in a new one? How can you be prepared for that in the event that that does happen? Or if you have multiple interests, how can you engage in all of them at the same time until the paths need to diverge again? And then how do you pick which one to go on or disengage and re-engage on another path? So that's all parallel planning. That's the proactive side. So you're interested in art and business. Cool. Let's look at what your first couple of years looks like, how the curriculum kind of overlaps with each other, how you can stay engaged in both programs until maybe the curriculum diverges so much that you have to choose business or art, or maybe a little bit of both in a different way. Or maybe one of them is competitive admissions and you need to be prepared for what happens if you don't get admitted to that program. There's really effective ways to go about parallel planning. And one of the biggest risks with it is triggering imposter syndrome in students. The minute you say, but what if, you might come across as that person that says you can't, not just I want to make sure you have all these plans in mind because anything could happen. They're thinking, oh, this person just doesn't believe in me at this point. So in a way that normalizes it for students. So that's why I'm a huge proponent of, if you teach like a first year engagement course or, a transfer transition seminar, that's where you talk about this content is in front of everybody. So it's not just I'm singling you out as you need to think through this, but at large of this is a very normal process to go through and think about for everybody, regardless if you're the perfect 4.0 student or the student that has 500 interests that they want to pursue simultaneously. And then on the other side of it is that reactive moment, the moment that goal disengagement becomes a requirement. So that's where we talk about advising for alternatives. So there is that selective program and they didn't get into it, or something is forcing them out of their ultimate career goal choice right now. What does that mean for them? How do we have that conversation, which can often be at a time of crisis? And how do we make that a positive experience for students? So on the parallel planning side, it's all about trying to make sure that students understand that this is totally normal and a really good thing for them to do and engage with to maximize their educational experience. And then on the alternative advising side, it's really helping students process that crisis and that potential trauma and then move forward in a positive way.
Do you feel there's any misconceptions that people might have about parallel planning or alternatives? Like, do they think it's just the plan B? Any ideas with that?
Yeah, it's definitely not a backup or a plan B or your emergency plan or in case of fire, use this. That really immediately creates this tone of it's less than. And parallel planning is all about it's not less than, it's equally valuable and worthy of pursuit for the student. So it's not that, well, if I don't get into this, I'll just settle and go for this. It's I am choosing to engage in this plan instead because it's equally valuable and rewarding and aligned with my interests. And if students have a hard time figuring out what that equally valid path is, that's where we start talking about there are other ways to kind of parallel plan. Maybe you're thinking about applying to multiple schools with that same type of program that are all selective. I did that a lot with nursing admissions. So for a few years, I was the transfer academic coordinator for WCU's College of Nursing, so helping students understand how their courses would transfer, what requirements they needed to meet to be eligible to apply to our nursing program. And it was insanely competitive. But what I quickly realized is 4 different colleges in a very immediate vicinity of maybe a 2-hour driving distance across each other all had 4 very different admission systems. So whereas ours was very GPA heavy, another school was very work experience heavy, and another school was a little bit of both. And so then pretty quickly you could say it's not about this school saying no and all your dreams are shattered at this point. It's there is a system that works with you and will favor the strengths that you bring. Let's find that one. And so parallel planning can exist that way too, but the last thing you want to think about it is as a emergency plan, backup plan, because that's also going to just make students feel like they're pursuing something that they really never wanted to in the first place.
Kyle, is there anything that you or any advice that you give to people when they come up to you and they say, I'm thinking about taking the leap and getting my PhD? What would you say?
Oh, good question. I think I'm actually now ready to answer that in a positive way because there's always that moment after you complete your degree that you're like, don't do this. What I would say is have very specific goals in mind. For a lot of folks, so I did my doctorate while I was working full-time as an academic advisor. So I was in school part-time and working 40 hours plus a week at the same time, and then also engaged with Nakata. So when you think about a doctorate or a master's degree in a different field or however you want to advance yourself, that is a huge, significant personal investment on your end. And you want to think really hard about what those end game goals are for you. And you may not have all that answers of what you want to do in 40 years. I still don't. Well, in 40 years, I hope I'm retired at that point. You have to really step back and think through, what does this degree enrich for my life immediately? What does this degree open up for me in pursuit of my career goals immediately or in 5 years? And how does that help with however far you can see into the future for yourself? So early on for myself, I knew I wanted to be an administrator. I knew that because I really love strategic planning and really thinking through where we are right now. There are things that we can do right now, and that's great. But sometimes it makes me feel like I'm a human fire extinguisher especially with my team where we're all just trying to survive right now through priority advising and registration, right? And those conversations are fine, but for me, I really thrive on but things can look really different in 5 years, and what can we do now about that to help propel ourselves into that future? And one of my friends was like, "You sound like an administrator already." So I knew pretty early on I was eventually want to hopefully pursue something like a dean of student success, vice provost of student success, assistant vice provost of student success. I'm really not sure I want to go much further than that. I really love student success, in case you can't tell, and advising. So, I don't want to get too far removed from that, but I want to engage in a way that I can help enrich students' experiences more strategically and think through, well, just because I can't fix this for this one student right now, I might be able to fix this for 1,000 students later. So I knew pretty early on that if I wanted to get into those roles, a doctorate would certainly help me do so, but it also give me the skills I would need in terms of research, data-driven, strategic operation management, and then just larger context of higher education. That was my specialization. It was an educational leadership doctorate, but with a specialty in higher ed. So a lot of my coursework was in higher education and then research in higher education.
Yeah, and then with your dissertation, so that was focused on action research methods to learn about student attrition from an online nursing program. Can you talk about why that research was important to you and also what you found out about student attrition?
Yeah, I can nerd out about student attrition all day. So, a lot of folks talk about student retention. A lot of folks don't talk about student attrition. And those are two very different sides of the same coin. So what drives a student to stay is not the same reason that a student decides to leave. If a student says, I chose to stay because of this wonderful financial support and this awesome course that helped me transition to the university successfully, another person could be grieving very deep loss in their family and going through a lot of personal crisis. So factors that drive retention and keeping a student may not always be perfectly lined up with why a student ultimately leaves, and we need to hear that story too. Because we do a lot of things to try and keep them and get them to stay, but sometimes attrition is inevitable, or it's needed, or it's the best thing that a student can do in that moment in time for themselves. And so you have to think about, how do I bring them back? Or maybe there are severe inequities and barriers in your program or institution, and you hear that more from the students who leave. Not necessarily from the students who stay. You will hear from the students who stay as well, but you have to hear from both sides. So there's a lot of research in the nursing world about student retention and baccalaureate nursing programs, associate's degree programs, and even just in the career overall, because there's a high attrition rate there and burnout rate. And so specifically, I was looking at our RN to BSN completion program. So for registered nurses who did their 2-year program, wanting to finish their bachelor's degree, why would they leave at this point? Because now they're already a nurse, they're invested in their career and their profession, and there was a really big push for completion of the BSN degree. So the Institute of Medicine back in 2010 said, hey, we want more BSN prepared nurses, and we're going to get 80% of our nursing workforce to have a BSN or higher by the year 2020. Folks, that did not happen. I think we're still at about 55 to 60% at that point. Now I was doing this research. So we wanted to look at why students started this big investment on their part that was driven by external catalysts saying you should complete this, and yet they were leaving. And one of the biggest finds for us was that the students who were leaving our program were very different from what the literature suggested anywhere else. So a lot of literature out there about nurses who had been in the field for 20 years who weren't getting value out of the BSN completion program because they had been doing this for 20 years. 90% of our students who were leaving the program were nurses who just started the career within 1 or 2 years of getting initial licensure. And so that's where action research really is helpful, is for an institution to think around what are the very specific contextual factors at play in their community and in their institution that you can't just capture through standard research around, let's test pre-post test or something. Action research is all about hearing the narratives of folks who engage with your problem of practice, who want to improve around that problem practice, and really using the contextual expertise they bring to really attend to the nuances of that community driving that change, or in this case, our RN to BSN program. So I brought together advisors, program administrators, and faculty to really think through this. And we identified solutions that we thought would work really well. We still bid out. Well, I also left the position about a year later after doing this research. So I don't have the data for you right now around how those actions worked, but we put together some really great plans around. We think some more financial support will help in some ways, some help with working with hospitals in the local area to transition students into the BSN completion program and tie that well into their transition into the profession. Some other ideas around communicating with students regularly, all things that retention strategies tell you to do as well, but we would not have thought about them had we not talked amongst ourselves and really thought through what this means for our students who are leaving.
We're so happy that we could have you and try to get a deeper understanding of your history and your contributions. We're so excited to see what will happen this next year with you as president. If any of our listeners are wanting to know more or wanting to get in touch with you, how can they do that?
Absolutely. My email address is Kyle, Kyle, .Ross, ROSS, at OregonState.edu. If you are interested in getting involved with the association, not sure where to start, or in my case, one of the big things for me was, am I really ready for this? And needing to hear some encouragement for folks to just say, just do it anyway. And we need you. Feel free to reach out to me. I definitely grapple with those moments of, am I really ready for this? Is this the right position for me? How do I do this? Or where do I even get started? I would love to have those conversations with you. And I know there are a lot of folks out there who have those questions about the association. You are always welcome to contact me, and I would love to have a conversation with you about that.
All right, sounds good. Thank you so much for being on the podcast, Kyle.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. This was fun.
Great to see you.
Great to see you too.